there's a narrative of perfectionism when it comes to pro-environmental behaviours. There's the idea that if you can't do 100% good 100% of the time, there's no reason to do any good at all.
Welcome to the Research for Good podcast. I'm Professor David Ellis, and today I'm joined by Dr Annayah Prosser, who's an assistant professor in marketing, business and society. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, Annayah, we're in the School of Management. Can you tell us a bit about what brought you to Bath?
Sure. So I've actually been at Bath for a really long time now, because I also did my undergraduate, master's and PhD at Bath. And that was, I started off over in psychology with a bachelor's in psychology, and then my master's was a little bit more interdisciplinary. So technically my master's is in sustainable futures. And then I also did my PhD in psychology. But sort of, yeah, from a very young age, I was always really interested in people and why people do things and why people do things that are completely illogical and don't seem to make sense on a first glance. Why people do things that are bad, generally, like morally speaking, and why people do things that are bad for society, for the environment. None of this really made sense to me as a child, so I think I've spent a lot of my academic career trying to unpick the motivations behind sort of moral and immoral practices.
So people listening might think, well, it's interesting that you said you started in psychology, but now you're in the School of Management.
Yep.
How did that happen?
Throughout my time in psychology, again, I was really interested in people, but I'm also really interested in the context in which people sit. And I felt that psychology, I did a lot of work in kind of neuroscience, in behavioural economics, and it felt really too micro. Like we were looking at sort of getting people into labs and asking them to do very specific things, and then we were trying to make really big generalisations about what that meant to the rest of the world and to, you know, research impact into society. And I think there's a place for that kind of work, but to me it felt a little bit disingenuous, like knowing how complex people are, how complex their identities and lives are outside of the lab. It really felt like, to me at least, psychology wasn't doing a good enough job of kind of capturing that complexity. So I was always looking towards other disciplines to try and integrate that. So I worked a lot in sort of sociology as well, human geography, politics, trying to integrate lots of different social scientific disciplines to try and figure out why are people behaving in certain ways in the complex situations that they exist in. I did a lot of highly theoretical, what you'd call like basic research in psychology, and the thing I appreciate about work here at the School of Management is it is much more applied, it is much more industry focused, or everything we do has some kind of impact on society here.
When we think about research for good, can you just talk a little bit about what you're currently up to?
Yeah, sure. So I think like most academics, up to way too many things, and I never have quite enough time to do all of them. But broadly speaking, my research looks at the people who are already doing good within society and tries to understand the kind of barriers that those people face, tries to understand why it's really difficult oftentimes for people to do good things, both for, you know, society and for the natural environment as well. It can be really challenging for people to act in pro-environmental ways. So I try and go to the people who are already working against the tide to try and make things better. And I try and figure out how we can make that easier for them, essentially. So a lot of my work at the moment and in my PhD was looking at the sort of dietary space, so looking at dietary behaviour. So, for example, people who are vegan, people who are vegetarian, what motivates them to do those things and to reduce their meat consumption compared to people who haven't or won't do that kind of stuff. So I try and go to the people who are already changing with the hope that if we can unpick what is motivating them, we can then learn things that make it easier for everyone else to do those things.
So that feeds into things like further down the line of like behaviour change. So if you understand why someone's doing a behaviour that we might view as, good, then how do you then get other people to engage in those behaviours?
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of my PhD was based in environmental psychology. And one of the things that frustrated me about that discipline is we often spend time looking at people who don't currently do environmental practices or things that are good for the environment. And we try and figure out how to get them to be motivated to act. And I think that's actually taking it the wrong way around. The focus is wrong there. There are already loads and loads of people within society who are doing excellent stuff, but for whatever reason, they're not having the impact they want. Sometimes it's so hard that they stop completely, or they revert back to their anti-environmental ways. So I think if we can kind of target those groups and try and make it easier for them to have a positive impact, then hopefully that will make things a lot easier and better. So people often, and this is something the vegans talked about in the groups, people often come to the vegans and say, you're trying to do a good thing, but there's all of these kind of impacts that you haven't considered. We're getting onto something here about, which links to why it's so difficult for people who try to do good things to continue to do good things. They are often questioned at every single point about the potential impacts, have you thought about this? Have you done this perfectly? What is the point of reducing your meat consumption if soybeans are bad for the environment anyway? And this is something I really want to investigate in sort of my upcoming research. I think there's a narrative of perfectionism when it comes to pro-environmental behaviours. There's the idea that if you can't do 100% good 100% of the time, there's no reason to do any good at all. Now, perfectionism has been explored in lots of other domains, particularly within the management and organisation study space. And we know that perfectionism in the workplace is very damaging. It's very damaging when it comes to sort of anxiety disorders as well, but it's been less explored within the climate space.
When we think about people who are vegan, obviously there's variations in how extreme that can be. People can say tomorrow, I'm going to try and eat less meat, but I'm not going to be quite a vegan, or I'm going to be vegan, or I'm going to actually go even further than that and become an activist.
Yeah.
Can you say a little about, what, in your work, that's a layman's perspective.
Yeah.
Is that what's borne out in what you see?
So I think in the work that I've done, a lot of vegans do see activism as really fundamental to their veganism. So they, some of the vegans I spoke to even make a distinction between you're plant-based if all you do is eat differently, and you're vegan if you're also an activist. So activism is really, really central. But again, like maintenance of these practices, like a lot of other things, activism is really hard and it's really challenging. And it can be really isolating. So for context, I think at the moment, I think it's less than 2% of the entire population of the UK are vegan. So if you're a vegan, you are already in the societal minority. And then if you're an activist vegan who is engaging a lot, you're even further in the minority. So we're talking sort of like less than 1% of people here. And trying to push for change when you're in that small of a minority. I've done a lot of work in veganism, but there are other domains where this is also the case when it comes to lots of different social action causes and lots of different things. Pushing for change when you are in such a small minority is really challenging, and it's really difficult, and it's exhausting. Because every time you interact with a society that tells you your behavior is weird and your behavior is not accepted, that is a very personal affront. And you're kind of just walking around society knowing that who you are is not accepted by other people. And that might even be your own family. So, for some people it really is just a dietary practice, but for other people it means it could potentially mean cutting off relationships with other people. I mean, every single significant change within history has happened because of a small group of motivated people. So the key is keeping those people motivated and keeping them engaged. And we're trying to figure out ways to make it easier for these people to have an impact in the long run. So for some people, the idea that the sort of faith that they're making important changes that are really important to both their values and society is enough to keep them going alone. For a lot of other people, that sort of isolation and the loneliness interacts with, even if they feel inclined to do it, it might sort of wear them down a lot. So some of the work that I've been doing is looking at ways to protect activists from this kind of what I call activist burnout. So, burnout from the sort of organizational literature, again, is sort of like a state of clinical exhaustion where you've been working really, really hard and you get to the point where your body just breaks. That's sort of how it feels like when you're in burnout. And activist burnout is very, very similar, but hasn't been explored so much. Probably because it's not exactly linked to the workplace, it's linked to all of these other things. But we have a group of highly motivated people, and we have people potentially burning out and damaging themselves, reducing their motivation to continue, and maybe they just leave activism. And to me, that's a real shame, because we need these highly motivated people. So some of the work that I've been doing has been looking at ways to protect those people, and one of the things I've been investigating is sort of festival environments. So I call them identity centering events. So again, thinking about that focus group where we create a space where people with a shared identity can feel safe and secure and able to talk about their identity. I want to create more spaces or investigate more spaces where people with these kind of minoritized identities, again, like sort of in the less than 1% of people, feel able to be themselves fully and to talk to other people who are also interested in what they're doing and to also see the sort of moral imperative to do good. So in work that was published last year in political psychology, we looked at one specific context called the vegan campout, which is a really, really big, I think it's potentially the world's biggest vegan festival. So it's held every year in the UK. There's over 10,000 vegans there. All the stands are vegan, all the acts are vegan, all the speakers, all the music, all the musicians, everything there is vegan. So if you're a vegan existing in a society where 99% of people are not vegan, moving into that space where everything is vegan as default is really nice and is really important for kind of providing a space where vegans can rest, vegans can connect with other like-minded people, they can reconnect with their values, and sort of as a result of being in the space where they can feel joy and they can relax and they don't have to worry that someone's just going to randomly be cooking sausages next to them. So having an environment where even for a short space of time they can be in the majority, they can be sort of protected from those kind of external stimuli. We found that it was really, really good, and it really motivated a lot of vegans to keep going and to kind of keep the faith and to see that they're not acting alone, even though they feel alone a lot of the time, because they can come back every year and be in this space with other vegans.
And when we get to the sort of research for good or the sort of impact side of things, you're obviously learning things about people who are doing positive behaviour. So where is that impact at the moment?
I think the most fascinating thing to me so far that has come out of this kind of focus group research is that there's often an impression that groups of people who do good things in the environment are really singular in their goals, and they're pretty perfect when it comes to enacting those goals. So if you ask people about their impression of vegans, there'll be people who don't eat meat or dairy, and they're perfect at that, and they do that all the time. As soon as you get that group of vegans into a room and you create the safe space for them to really get into the day-to-day realities of their identity, you find that it's a lot more complicated. So it's probably not a surprise to vegans listening, but it's actually quite complicated to be 100% vegan 100% of the time in daily life. So for example, something that came up in the vegan groups is that currently the British money has an ingredient called lanolin.
Lanolin.
Yeah, which is like...
Comes from sheep's wool.
Comes from sheep's wool, right. So you can kind of... If you want to be 100% vegan, you have to exempt yourself from the economy of the UK. That's like the only way.
Well, we are heading towards a cashless society.
Yeah, maybe vegans like that, right?
So that might be a benefit.
And like vaccines as well is a big thing. So egg whites are in a lot of vaccines. And, you can't necessarily exempt yourself from getting a vaccine without some pretty dire circumstances for society as well. So in trying to do something really good there are actually a lot of complexities that we miss if we don't go to these people and talk to them about what they're doing.
So when it comes to understanding those people, so whether it's people who are vegan or another behaviour that we might view as positive to the environment, how do you go about studying that? What do? Do you just ask them, or?
Yeah, a lot of my work is qualitative, so I do ask them. And again, this kind of comes from, I've done a lot of work throughout my career in different research methods. I'm also very interested in sort of the process of doing research. So like we call it meta-science or meta-research. So actually at school, I really hated science because it was the way that it was taught to me at a British state school was there are facts, we know them, you remember them, you recite them. And actually, like, being on the sort of, like, ground level of doing research now, it just endlessly fascinates me how constructed everything is moment to moment, and how whenever you choose to study something, you're making choices about the kind of ways you study it, the kind of methods you use. So that drives a lot of my interest. But typically the research methods I use now are, like you said, talking to people a lot of the time. So I'm really interested in how these groups of pro-environmental actors talk about what they do, particularly how they talk with other people who also share the same behaviour. Because you may have had this experience in your life where if you have a identity and you're in a group of people who share that identity, you get into sort of the nitty-gritty of that conversation a lot quicker than if you are talking with people who don't share that identity. So I try and create environments where these groups can talk really freely about why they do stuff with other people who share that identity.
So it's sort of a way of trying to elicit more deeper thinking or
Yes.
deeper expression about why a behaviour. So you're talking to groups of people rather than just one-on-one.
Yeah, so I often use focus groups or group interviews, and I actually, in my PhD, created a focus group methodology where we just get the group of people with the shared identity in a room, and I'm not even there. So I'll just be outside, like, monitoring a PowerPoint with questions, and then it's up to the group to kind of determine how they're going to talk about it. Because I think that fundamentally social behaviour a lot of the time is created from how we talk about things and different constructs, so that's what I'm interested in.
When we think about the long-term impact here, it sounds like your work's heading in the direction where, you know, it's not just about individuals changing, it could be organisations, governments.
Absolutely.
You know, most governments want to do good things.
Yeah.
You know, we're constantly in a phase of responding, reacting to the changing world, to changing priorities.
Yeah.
What most people seeing on the news day in, day out is government does one thing, many people say it's the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, you know, but then they can't change their mind. I mean, I just wonder how much your work is going to play a role potentially in making that better.
I think one of the things that I think needs to happen is a kind of recognition and full understanding of the variety of perspectives we have on lots and lots of different issues. So oftentimes what we hear from sort of like, you know, at a sort of mass media level or like, you know, at the political level, when decisions are made or when articles are written, these are all informed by groups, essentially. They are all informed by people who are lobbying for that kind of stuff. They're informed by, for example, I know a lot of politicians nowadays use focus groups to kind of workshop their policies. But if you do that kind of stuff behind closed doors and without taking the rest of the population into account, you then just have a policy that fulfills the needs of, say, a maximum of 100 people in, I couldn't say how many people are in the UK right now, but you're kind of failing the rest of the population. And this is something that a lot of work in the climate change space is trying to reckon with. How do you get people involved in politics and decision making, and how do you improve people's engagement with it? Because it can be really, really difficult to kind of reckon with. I mean, it's pretty depressing. The way the world is pretty depressing, and we need to meet people where they're at, and sometimes those conversations are not going to be comfortable conversations. And, you know, I think, you know, a lot of politics, we've already seen even just this year the kind of vitriol that comes up at sort of like local elections even. But I think it is fundamentally the job of politicians to speak to people and to see what is going on and to try and synthesize that. And yeah, I mean, I would love to contribute to that. And I think, you know, in the coming decades, we're going to see a really different way of doing politics emerge. And I don't know what that looks like, but I hope I can contribute to it somehow.
You've been listening to the Research for Good podcast. To find out more about research in the School of Management, you can visit our website or click the links in the episode description.